Hello everyone, Mitch back here and welcome back to the channel. This is video number 3 of the Navigraph charts tutorial series here on the Aviator channel, and today we'll be talking about SIDs and stars. Now in more detail today, we're going to be talking about SIDs and stars in Canada. It's where I'm very familiar and very comfortable with, but at the end of the video I'll cover countries that have similarities in their SIDs and stars to what we have here in Canada, so you can get a little bit more of an idea on what it's like. Now I'm going to say and preface this video by saying that this video is going to be a little bit longer in duration, so feel free to click through as well as check the timestamps in the description down below on where you can see specific sections that you might be more interested in, so I don't bore you for the whole duration of this video. Now let's get started. SIDs and stars. SIDs are standard instrument departures and stars are standard terminal arrival routes. Pretty much sum it up in the basic terms for you guys is a SID gets you out of an airport, a star gets you into an airport. It allows for better flow and better separation of aircrafts and sequencing into airports, and kind of combines aircraft from the en route environment into a terminal environment and then prepares them for the approach stage of flight. Now you can look up more on SIDs and stars online, and if you're interested in seeing a video on this more in detail to understanding the specifics of a SID and star, let me know in the comments section down below and I can go over this. So in Canada, we have 3 specific types of SIDs. We have what's called a vectored SID, a vectored RNAV SID, and an RNAV SID. So the first one we're going to look at is a vectored SID, which is at my local airport here in Vancouver, British Columbia, based out of Vancouver, which is the Vancouver 1 departure. And the reason why we know this is a vectored SID is in the first little section here up at the top. You'll see it's Vancouver, British Columbia, and it says SID, Standard Instrument Departure. And we come down to the next little section here where it's the Vancouver 1 departure, the code that it is. So if you're looking in your FMS or your GPS, this is what it's going to most likely appear like in that unit, is the Vancouver 1. And as we know, it's a vectored SID. That's what that means in brackets there. So I'm going to give you a rundown of the information from top to bottom here on this SID and give you an idea on what this information is portraying to you, or what it's telling you in this case. So in the top left-hand corner, you have the ICAO code and the IATA code of the airport, so which in this case, Charlie Yankee Victor Romeo for Vancouver International Airport. The chart's validity date is the 30th of October of 20, the chart number, which is 10-3 Delta, and the effective date, which is November 5th of the same year. As I said before, it's Vancouver, British Columbia. It is a standard instrument departure. And then into the box below, it gives you what your departure frequency will be. So if you're departing on the north side of the airport, it'll be 126.125. Or on the south side of the airport, so potentially the south runways are going southbound, it's going to be 132.3. This can vary, of course, but this is just an idea and gives you somewhat of an idea on how to plan on what frequency that you might be using. You'll get the airport elevation and then your transition altitude. Once again, countries vary on transition altitude and transition level. In Canada and the United States, it's 18,000 feet for both the transition level and the transition altitude. So that's when we transition from 2909 or 2, or for those that utilize QNH, it's QNH 1013. That's when we would transition from pressure to standard pressure in this case. And then number 1 in the box here gives us our 100 nautical miles safe altitude. So safe altitude within 100 nautical miles is 12,800 feet. And then there's a note for non-jet aircraft here. Number 2, non-jet aircraft do not exceed 165 knots and climb until in contact with departure control and passing 4,000 feet. And then for jet aircraft, use noise abatement procedure 1 or 2. Now in Canada, we call these NADP 1 and NADP 2 departures. In the United States, I think they're called like standard 1 or standard 2. Don't quote me on that. Not really 100% sure on that. But in this case, they would reference that, and that is a totally different topic for another video and totally irrelevant to what it's telling us here today on the SID. But that is something that you should take note of when you're planning your departures, of course, that you might have to follow a specific noise abatement procedure. Number 4, refer to 10-4 in this case of the noise abatement procedures for additional requirements. So we know exactly where to find those procedures. Then coming down on the header here, you have the Vancouver 1 departure. Once again, what it might be in your GPS or your FMS, the identifier for it. So it's Vancouver 1 and it's a vectored SID. Then you get your overall graphic on what it's going to look like, what it's going to essentially look like from a top-down view and how you would fly this departure. Now, the reason why I'm going to say this is we assign this on VATSIM as controllers, and the SID about 75% of the time gets misflown somehow. People get the impression that they just can turn directly to the Vancouver VOR in this case. And you'll see that that's actually incorrect because it's a vectored SID. And I'll show you why it's a vectored SID here in a moment. But you have your graphical overview with where true north is pointing. And then you have these orange / brownish lines, whatever color you want to call this, that breaks up from, in this case, the Vancouver VOR, your 25 sector safe, your 25 miles safe, your minimum sector altitude or minimum safe altitude in some cases, where it's based off. So in this case, the Vancouver VOR, so to the northwest, it's 7,000 feet. To the northeast, 6,700 feet, southeast, 3,800 feet, and southwest, 5,000 feet. So in most cases, if you're erring on the side of safety, you're going to go with the highest sector, so 7,000 feet to the northwest sector in this case. Then sliding down a little bit more, you're going to have some requirements for the SID. So in this case, this SID requires a minimum climb gradient of off runway 26 left and 26 right at 290 feet per nautical mile to 2,100 feet. Just to keep it simple for you guys, we're not going to cover what climb gradient is in this case, but essentially you have to meet a certain climb to a certain point in this case, which is 2,100 feet. And if you're unable to maintain that single engine, you have to figure out how you can maintain single engine or come up with alternate departure arrangements to where you can actually meet your climb gradients in this case, which is standard 200 feet per nautical mile. But this one requires a minimum climb of 290 feet per nautical mile off this specific runway. It breaks it down a little bit more. Once again, we're not going to cover exactly what these numbers are, but they're just the information presented on the plate. And then in this box with these triangles and this gray lost comms text is your lost comm procedure. And outlines that if something was to happen where you lost your radios, your V pilot died, something died, this is what you're expected to follow and execute if something takes place within that certain constraint. Anything outside of that constraint you refer to en route comm failure procedures, but in this case you follow the SID comm failure procedures. Now we're going to move down to probably the most important informational section on this box or on this plate, which is the actual information that we need to know to get the airplane going. So ATC clears you out of Vancouver. They say Air Canada 123 cleared to Edmonton, Vancouver 1 departure, runway 26 left, flight plan route, and squawk code 1234. So you know that you're going to be departing off runway 26 left. So you're going to look for runway 26 left in this case. So 26 left, 26 right. You're going to climb heading 263 or as assigned by ATC. That's it. So your lateral navigation, you're going to climb heading 263 or whatever ATC tells you to do. And you're going to keep doing that until you end up in Japan, until ATC gives you an instruction otherwise. Like I said, a big issue that we have on VATSIM and we're trying to rectify with newer pilots is understanding that a vectored SID is ATC is going to give you an instruction eventually to turn somewhere else. So we expect you to follow this out until we tell you otherwise. And if you do something different, that is a surprise to us at the end of the day. So coming down after that little section, now we have our lateral, what we're going to do. So our left and our right. So we're going to climb out or heading 263, but what altitude do we have to go to? Well, if we go down to the routing section here, it tells us maintain 7,000 feet, or as assigned, we'll expect radar vectors, there's another note right there, to filed/assign route and clearance to flight plan altitude within 5 minutes after departure. So in our head as pilots, is we're going to sit there, we're going to line up on the runway in 26 left in Vancouver, we're going to give it everything she's got, and when we rotate, we're going to climb out to 7,000 feet on a heading of 263 until ATC tells us otherwise. So the instruction of what we're going to set our autopilot up for, whatever you have in your airplane to get it to go where it needs to go, you're going to climb 263 on the heading and up to 7,000 feet. And this applies to all different runways on the vectored SID. And as you can see, you would just follow the instruction as assigned. You'll note that runway 31 or runway 31 here in Vancouver has a little bit different. You're going to climb heading 305 to 500 feet, and then you're going to make a climbing left turn to 263 or as assigned by ATC. And once again, it is outlined on the graphic here. And a little note is if you don't even read the information down below, it all tells you this on the graphic right here. 5,000 or 500 feet and above, make that left turn. So above 500 feet, make that left turn 263. The only depiction that this graphic doesn't tell you is what altitude you have to climb to. And that's where you just have to reference this maintain 7,000 feet down here. And everything else can be drawn. If you are a picture person or you learn by images, it can all be taught to you right then and here, right on screen. Moving on to our next departure, here we're staring at the dead key for departure in Toronto. This may be very familiar what we saw in the last video, and there's a specific reason why I chose that one to talk about today, which is this is an RNAV SID, but more specifically a vectored RNAV SID. And we'll compare the two with this one and the next one that we'll see. So feel free to jump from this section to the next section to compare the two and where they alter. I will describe in the next SID why it's different compared to this one. But this is a vectored RNAV SID out of Toronto, and it presents the exact same information or very similar information of what we saw in the last one. But it's just broken up a little bit differently, and we're going to cover that here right now. So, important information to cover once again is in this case, we're looking to see that it is an RNAV SID out of Toronto. Now, this is where you have to be careful because there is an RNAV SID and a vectored RNAV SIDs, and they're all RNAV SIDs are going to say RNAV SID on the top of them. So don't get that confused. And this is where you have to pay very close attention to the diagram as well as what it says in the writing down below, because there is bolded text that we are going to pay very close attention to, that you should pay very close attention to when you fly specific SIDs like this. So in this case, the dead key for departure, very similar to what we just saw in the Vancouver one, but let's use runway 24 left as the example, or 24 right as the example out of Toronto. So runway 24 right, unless otherwise assigned by ATC, we're going to climb heading 237 to 1,000 feet. Climbing left turn, heading 235, so a 2-degree turn, a slight 2-degree turn to the left, or as assigned, and we'll expect radar vectors to Savior or as assigned, then by a depicted route. And that little blurb right there, that last little sentence where it says expect radar vectors to Savior or as assigned, then proceed by depicted route. That is the important part. We'll go to the actual visual diagram here and zoom in. So once again, 237, and then at 1,000 feet, 235, and then we got our little triangles here yet again telling us, hey, this is vectors. We're going to fly vectors here. And then ATC, somewhere about 3,600 feet in Toronto. Don't quote me on that, but 3,600 feet, you're going to say, Air Canada 123, turn left direct to Savior on course. And then you're going to make that left turn direct to Savior. In this case, you're going to whoop and direct to Savior. And then at that point, ATC is not going to give you any other instructions except for to climb higher. So they're going to say, hey, climb flight level 230 in this case. But you're just going to follow this depicted route all the way out on whatever transition you're on. And on the ground, they're going to clear you via specific transition. So cleared via the dead key for departure, Miglo transition, or a Laba transition, or a Rackham transition, or two-leg transition. They're going to give you one of these transitions. You have to make sure you program the right one, and it's going to take you all the way out to that point. And ATC will not give you any lateral guidance unless they need to get you away from another airplane. And that's where you're on the RNAV section of the SID. So they take you from the vectors and then they spit you onto the RNAV section, and then it's all up to you. Just a one little note is about altitude, unless otherwise assigned by ATC, maintain 5,000 feet. So they could sit there and say, hey, proceed direct to Savior, but you're not cleared any higher. You're going to stop your climb at 5,000 feet and keep going to Savior there. But in most cases, they're going to clear you higher, then they're going to clear you laterally in that case. So just have to pay close attention. It's the key thing that you'll note when flying on online networks or following SIDs and stars like this, is you just have to pay close attention to the detail and take a few extra minutes to understand what the information is being presented in front of you. Because it's relatively easy to make a mistake on, but at the same time, if you take 2 seconds to understand what it's presenting to you, you'll succeed far greater at the end of the day, and you won't upset the controller because you followed it exactly how it was depicted. So let's move on to the next and our final SID. Our final SID this evening is the TLAC-1 departure, which once again, we see that it is an RNAV SID. But you'll notice that this one's a little bit different. You don't see any triangles anywhere. Well, you see some triangles, but they're different triangles in this case. This is a straight RNAV SID out of Quebec City. There is very few airports I know of in Canada that have this, and Quebec City is one of the rare ones that have a straight RNAV SID. There probably is a bit more, but this is one that I know because I've flown out of Quebec City quite a few times myself to understand that this departure was here, and it made it very helpful to make this video today. But this is the last SID we have to cover, which is a straight RNAV SID. There's no vectoring involved. You as the pilot are expected to navigate via this plate, and ATC won't give you any other instructions unless they need to move you away from another aircraft. A lot of departures that you will see over in Europe, like if you were to pull up London Heathrow, for example, and then that's the example we're going to use here in a moment, are utilize this format of just straight RNAV SID. From the time you rotate, ATC is expecting you to navigate somewhere unless they clear you direct somewhere. And this is the concept that we use on very few departures in Canada, but we more so have that hybrid method that I talked about, that vectored RNAV SID that we saw in the previous example. So like I said in the previous example too, reference this one to the last one, and you'll see the difference in where it is. But let's talk about it now. So once again, it's an RNAV SID. It gives us all the information that we talked about before. Lost comms, in this case, refer to 10-3, which is a different plate. A little bit of obstacle information, but this is where it's different. So let's refer to the little blurb down here below. The important information. Always go to the bottom for the important information on these charts. Initial climb, do not exceed 220 knots until Uxbun. Climb track 294 to TLAC, then climbing left turn direct to Uxbun. Climb and maintain 7,000. Then on the transitions, if you're on one of these transitions, let's use the Olavo transition from Uxbun track 330 to Olavu. So if we look at the diagram here, we're going to depart 294 and make that climbing turn to TLAC, and then make that left turn to Uxbun, max 220 knots. And then when we hit Uxbun, boom, right turn direct to Olavo. And there you go. ATC at this point hasn't given you any vectors, any instructions. The only thing they're going to say when you contact Quebec Terminal once you get in the air, 127.85, is they might just clear you higher than 7,000 feet. They laterally are expecting you to follow this until they give you, unless they give you instructions otherwise. This is the importance between these three. Is this one, you might not hear any lateral guidance given to you, whereas the vectored one, the Vancouver one, expect lateral guidance to be given to you. With the vectored RNAV SID, expect lateral guidance to be given to you as well. With this one, don't expect any lateral guidance to be given to you unless you're getting a shortcut of some sort. So that's where you have to pay really close attention to what actually type of SID that you're flying so you don't make that mistake. That pretty much covers it for SIDs and stars and the relative information that you need to know to get yourself started in this case. I could really go in a lot more detail on what these plates are telling us. And if you'd like a realistic breakdown and telling you all the information on this Jeppesen plate, by all means, I can go ahead and do that in a later video, but you have to let me know in the comment section down below. So let's pop ahead over to London Heathrow really quickly and take a look at a SID out of there so you can fully understand and grasp the concept of how it differs in other countries too. So here is a SID out of London Heathrow, which in this case, it is the, I just pulled up a random one here. It's the Mayfield 3 Foxtrot or Mayfield 2 Golf departure. It varies from what runway it is in this case. And this is where you have to pay close attention to what actual departure you get assigned out of an airport like this. But as you can see, comparing it to the Quebec City one we just saw, it is expecting the pilot just to navigate themselves along the way. And this is just a straight RNAV SID. But you'll notice that they name their SIDs differently, where they just call it SID. Very similar to what we saw with the first one. So don't get that confused. So there's the slight differences, but it's just the small little nuances there that can really throw you off at the end of the day. So pay very close attention to what the graphic is telling you and very close attention to what the routing and the detailed information is providing for you down below, and you'll have great success at the end of the day. So we're going to just pause here, take a quick moment to breathe, catch ourselves, and then we're going to talk about stars, which in Canada we have 2 specific types of stars, and then we'll talk about stars going into other countries too, and then we'll wrap up this video. Okay, so now that we've looked at the SIDs, we're going to get right into the stars here that we have here in Canada on Navigraph charts. So we have 2 types of stars here in Canada. We have RNAV stars and then RNAV stars that lead directly into an approach. So the RNAV star that we're looking at here today is the Esky 2 into Edmonton for runway 20 and runway 30. So as you can see, it's outlined that by the chart, and you'll notice there's a constant trend here with these formats, that they all follow the exact same format. So it's clear, precise, and every bit of information that you're getting on the chart is presented to you in the most clean and professional manner possible. Now you'll notice one thing different about the arrival stars compared to the arrivals compared to the departures, which is there's no detailed box telling you exactly what you need to do. In this case, ATC is going to give you an instruction, and you have to comply with the altitude restrictions on the star in this case. So let's say hypothetically ATC says descend 5,000 feet. For the whole arrival, we need to be at ski below flight level 190. And if we were to go for runway 30 in this case, runway 30, we'll go 120 to LNAG. We need to be above 8,000 there. Sod max 210 on the speed at 7,000 feet. That's what these two blue lines mean. It's a solid altitude, so between that altitude, so right at 7,000. Then the Suvat max 210, and then the Mesva for vectors afterwards. Once again, if you start seeing these triangles right at the end of these points, that means for vectors in this case. Now, the one thing you'll notice about this one that's different prior to what we saw on the SIDs is these lines. We did see this on one of the SIDs, I believe, but on these stars, you have to pay close attention to this. So you'll see a line. This blue line signifies either above or below. So in this case, we need to be at the Eski intersection below flight level 190. Notice how the flight level 190 is written below the line. So we need to be below flight level 190. And then if we go down to LNAG, see how the line is below the 8,000, but the 8,000 number is above the line. So we need to be at or above 8,000 feet. And then the final one, which kind of adds the creme de la creme to it all, is if you see two lines with the number in between them, that means you have to be at that altitude. So Sod, we have to be at 7,000 feet. No 8,000, no 7,500, not 6,500, 7,000 feet, solid number there. Now, the difference between this one and the next star that we'll look at is this leads into a vector afterwards. So unless they give you instructions otherwise, this is going to take you out into oblivion until ATC tells you otherwise. They're going to vector you in for the arrival. So in this case, it would be an ILS or a localizer approach, or this one you're planning for the RNAV 20 if you're going for runway 20. But there's some notes in here too. If you tell ATC you're planning one of these approaches here, this is going to help them out in their planning purposes. And in some cases, it actually might waive certain restrictions that are placed on the star. So let's take a look at ILS 30. So aircraft planning the ILS 30 or RNAV GNS Zulu runway 30 cross Sod at or above 7,000. So Sod at or above 7,000 in this case. So you can plan at 7,000 or you can still be above 7,000 in that case. Because if we pull up the approach plate in that case for Edmonton, so let's just go ahead and do that just so you can get it for the example and the complete understanding here. So if we pull up the ILS 30, there's actually a transition via Suvat that's going to take you down to 5,000 feet. So if you aim for that 7,000 on the previous plate there, so let me just pin this plate so we can flip between the two. So if you see, you got Sod and then Suvat. So if you aim for that 7,000 at Sod, you'll most likely be cleared that 5,000 feet by Suvat, and then you'll just transition onto the approach. So your ATC instruction in that case is something along the lines of Air Canada 123 via Suvat cleared the ILS runway 30 approach. So you'll fly the Suvat to the GVON and then intercept the localizer and glide path all the way down into Edmonton in this case. It's very clean, it's very well set up. But in this case, if you don't have the ability to get cleared the approach prior to Suvat and end up going to MESAV, you're going to get vectors somewhere in the vicinity here to get direct or radar vectors to fly or get set up to fly this approach. Excuse me for stepping over my words there. So let's move on to the next star so you can kind of see where it actually sets you up a little bit better than this arrival would. So once again, we're jumping back over to Quebec City here. Quebec City is one of those airports that seems to have everything that we need for when it comes to SIDs and stars. So this is one that I've flown before, the PSAC 4 arrival into Quebec City. And once again, it's an RNAV Star. This is kind of a hybrid RNAV Star because this one transitions actually directly onto an approach, but also for other runways like 24 and 29, it's a vectored approach or a vectored star into an approach. I don't want to get these terms confusing too much, but I want to show you like where this approach or where this arrival is different compared to the previous one we just looked at going into Edmonton. And the keynote difference here that I'm going to just focus on is if we zoom in here, this approach right here for runway 06 into Quebec City comes directly off of the arrival. So you'll go 096 onwards to Kivat, and then by Kivat, you'll be cleared the ILS approach runway 06 into Quebec City. So in some cases, you might hear an instruction via Air Canada 123 descend 3,000 feet via Kivat cleared ILS runway 06 approach Quebec City, something of that sort. And that could be all the way back here. Like you could still be up in the flight levels in some cases if, well, probably not in the flight levels, but low teens-ish, mid-teens-ish. So like 15,000 feet, you could be cleared something like that as you're coming down the arrival here. And somewhere over near PSAC, you could be cleared that approach all the way back there, where in some cases they won't clear you for an approach until you're actually within intercept or within a certain guidance or guidelines set for that approach. So this is where these arrivals are designed to be a little bit more efficient for aircraft planning purposes and more economical for operators. It allows for later descents, less power to be used, and a constant descent angle to be used all the way until intercepting, in this case, the localizer and the glide slope for the final approach into Quebec City. Now, one airport that NAV Canada has been developing over the years and using as kind of a test bed airport. And let me just preface this by saying that NAV Canada is the ATC body here in Canada that essentially designs these approaches and then publishes or designs these plates and publishes them out to the public to use and what we're expected to follow. We're going to go to Calgary. And the reason we're going to go to Calgary is they utilize RNP frequently over there, but they based off of the stars that they go from the star onto the RNP approach. WestJet is a big advocate of utilizing this. They use it quite frequently from what I know, because it's very efficient from a planning purpose where they can just do an idle descent constantly until pretty much touchdown. I had to remember an arrival that actually utilizes this. Yes, the Flame 6 is a perfect one for the 3.5s. So you'll come down the Flame 6. Once again, it's an RNAV star, vectored RNAV star. But if we were to transition to the RMP, runway 35 left, so we'll do RNAV RMP Yankee, runway 35 left. So we'll just notice how this actually spits you out onto a vector. If we pull up the RMP here, via Sulet, as you'll see, that mandatory altitude at Sulet actually transitions you onto this RMP approach. And it's a constant flow motion. And Calgary has this designed for a majority of their runways, and it works very, very well. Edmonton is somewhat going the same way too. But I think ultimately, as the ATC network gets more and more improved in Canada over the next several years, they ultimately want to go to this RNP type style system, if not RNAV system, and kind of do away with traditional nav aids, because as you can see, even we have the VOR approach into Calgary, which I doubt anybody has ever had to fly this in real life unless they were doing it for training purposes. So I think that covers everything that I wanted to cover in these videos. For the most part. If you do have any questions, any concerns at all, or anything that you'd like me to break down a little bit more, please let me know in the comment section down below, and I can dig into detail a little bit more in a follow-up video to this series. But in the next video, we'll be covering these different styles of approaches, understanding what the approach plates are telling us, and some of the cool features that are involved in Navigraph charts that even change the charts on the fly for you. And you'll see how cool those are. So once again, if you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button down below, subscribe button too if you're new to the channel here. And once again, in the comment section down below for any suggestions or any questions that you might have. And once again, guys, we'll see you in the next video.